When the team at Santa Monica Studio started working on the God of War reboot, they were confident in the new direction. A more mature story, a tighter camera, a brand new weapon. Everything was shaping up to give Kratos a fresh start. But once they had early combat prototypes, something felt off. It didn't seem to matter that the animations were crisp or the hits were heavy. It just didn't feel fun. It didn't feel playful. That was surprising. The original games were all about play, wide, following attacks with chain blades, grabbing and tossing enemies, juggling them in the air like angry toys. So how did the team go from that to a game that no longer feels that fun to play? And how did they turn it around? Not only bringing back the playful feel, but setting a new standard for action combat games that would go on to influence all other AAA games. The initial problems were not that obvious to solve. The camera was now much closer. The new weapon, axe, was slower than the classic chained blades and hit fewer enemies at once. The overall tone of the game was now more serious. Piece by piece, the team had moved away from the systems that made the old games feel like a violent playground. And now they had to figure out how to bring that feeling back. In this video, we are going to look at what makes combat feel playful. Not just effective or cinematic, but something you want to engage with over and over, just because it's fun. And we'll do that by looking at games that nailed it. Games where combat is more than just a chore between story bits. It's the main dish. Let's start where we began, with God of War. Back in 2005, the original God of War team described their combat design with the phrase "ballet of fire", and it fit. Kratos wasn't just controlling the whole battlefield. The camera gave you a full view of the action. The Blades of Chaos let you hit enemies from all directions. You could grab, throw, and juggle them like they were part of some brutal routine. You weren't just fighting, you were toying with your enemies. But when the team started working on the reboot, the camera was pulled in closer. You couldn't see all enemies in the battlefield. From now on, the new weapon, axe, only hit what was directly in front of the player. It felt more grounded and deliberate, but less free. At first, the team just kept zooming the camera back out, hoping to recapture that old feel. But that wasn't the right solution. It was rather taking a step back to the solution that felt safe. They needed to rethink the combat from the ground up. That's where the first idea of throwing and recalling the axe came in. It gave the player more reach, more options, and a little bit of that mystical feel of the weapon. With the axe gone, before calling it back, Kratos could punch and kick enemies around. It was definitely a step in the right direction, but when playtesters got their hands on the game, something was still off. Players were backing away, blocking all the time. When a group of enemies showed up, people felt nervous instead of excited. That was the opposite of the old feeling, where a group of enemies meant more chances to show off. In the original God of War, a big group of enemies made you feel excited. So the team started breaking things down. What made the original combat feel so playful? The first and most important task was fully adapting to the new camera angle. With the camera pulled in so close behind Kratos, players had to rely on subtle visual cues to judge distances. And that led to some very different playstyles. Some players, including the combat designers, would angle the camera lower, using the floor as a reference to tell how far away the nearest enemy was. If the enemy looked too far, they would just move in closer before swinging. But other players, like creative director Cory Barlog, preferred a more cinematic look. They tilted the camera upward, aiming it at the higher point of enemies, with Kratos' silhouette against them. It looked great and cinematic, but it had a side effect. The ground was not as visible with such an angle, and without a clear view of the floor, judging distances became much harder. Players would swing their axe and miss, watching Kratos just cut through empty space, which felt frustrating. To fix this, the team implemented what they called a suck-to-target system. If the system realizes that your attack would just barely miss the enemy, the game automatically brings Kratos forward, just enough to make the hit land. In other games, this system is called the motion warping. But the team also had to decide who gets hit when multiple enemies are technically in range. The solution was a mix of factors. Which enemy is the player currently looking at with the right stick? Which direction is the player moving with their left stick? And whether the attack was a follow-up to a previous hit to the same enemy. Suck-to-target system in combination with a soft lock that prioritizes which enemy should get hit finally reduced the need to pull the camera away. Second problem to fix was the crowd control. The player needs tools that makes them feel safe and confident even when surrounded with enemies. To address that, the team came up with a new system of hit reactions that spread between enemies. Hit just one enemy and they would bump into others. The axe would stick in enemies for just a moment, giving player the right feel of how heavy and deadly the weapon actually is. Initially, hit reactions were also pushing enemies away, allowing player to plow through a group of enemies. Hence, the new phrase describing the combat, plowing the road. But that wasn't an ideal solution. Pushing a singular enemy forward with every hit meant that the player would also be slowly moving forward, leaving other enemies to the sides and behind. That introduced a problem. After a few hits, enemies that aren't your main target would slowly disappear to the sides, lowering the awareness of their position. Players would feel anxious about enemies that are no longer visible on the screen. That's where a brilliant solution was born: the strike assist system. It boils down to this: when hitting an enemy, it wouldn't be simply pushed back with the hit reaction. The system would make sure it would be pushed right into a position the player is currently looking at. This brought back that feeling of toying with your enemies. You weren't just hitting them, you were placing them right where you want them to be. All of those changes made mashing R1 feel good again. You weren't just attacking, you were clearing a path and toying with your enemies. The next step the team decided to take is looking at responsiveness. Players needed to be able to cancel moves and change their mind, depending on the priority of the action they want to perform. They decided to borrow some ideas from UI design talks from companies known for their UX-friendly approach like Apple, and the team decided they wanted controls that felt as natural as walking in real life.
We want to allow for constant redirection and interruption. This one's big. So our bodies and minds are constantly in a state of redirecting in response to change in thought, like we talk about. So if I was walking to the end of this stage here, and I realized I forgot something back there, I could just turn back immediately, and I wouldn't have to wait for my body to reach the end before I did that, right? So it's important for our interfaces to be able to reflect that ability of constantly redirecting, and it makes it feel connected to you.
That meant allowing players to cancel attacks into blocks or into any other special move. It made the combat feel looser, in a good way, like it was always ready to react to your changes. Early in development, the team experimented with a grab meter, something that would fill up a special move, independent of specific enemies. It had a cool upside. You could start a fight by immediately using a powerful grab attack, but most players ended up hoarding it, saving it for a perfect moment that rarely came. You probably know that feeling of saving up that potion you collected a few hours ago, because maybe you will need to use it later, and then you finish the game with 20 of those potions still in your inventory. You can see a similar issue in Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, where prosthetic tools cost spirit emblems, items that you collect from defeated enemies. And just like with that grab meter, players often hesitate to use those special abilities. Because again, what if I run out of those before I encounter a tougher enemy or a boss fight? For God of War, the stun system was better fit. Instead of a global resource, it worked on a per enemy basis. Attacking enemies filled up their individual stun bars, encouraging players to stay aggressive. Once stunned, the enemies could be grabbed and finished off. It was fast, satisfying, and kept the combat flowing. Even unintended player actions became part of the design. Players might hit block at the wrong time and accidentally get a perfect parry, or accidentally stun an enemy without even meaning to do it. This happy accident nudged players towards new strategies, making the system feel more generous and fun. The team also put a lot of thought into enemy design. With the camera now pulled in so close, it was harder for players to keep track of what enemies were doing. To help with that, enemies were given a clear wind-ups and taunts to signal when they were about to attack and which enemy is currently holding the aggression ticket. That made it easier to read the battlefield, even with that limited visibility with new camera. The team also spent a lot of time tuning how enemies move and position themselves on the battlefield. The goal was to keep enemies reposition themselves to stay in camera as much as possible. Adding health bars helped too. Players could now see which enemies were close to dying or which one is low on stamina, which made moment-to-moment decisions more interesting. Do you finish off the weak enemy or control the biggest threat? These little choices added to the sense of flow and playfulness of the combat. When the team started testing a stamina system, something to make things even more grounded and deliberate, they realized it slowed everything down. Kratos is a demigod. He doesn't need to stop to catch his breath, because Kratos doesn't stop to reload his chain blades. That exact phrase, Kratos doesn't need to reload his blades, inspired other teams on the other side of the industry. Where God of War asked players to push forward with control, Doom asked players to never stop moving. Doom's combat was built around the idea of momentum, something that the team often described as the dance. Combat wasn't about staying in one spot and clearing enemies methodically. It was about reacting fast, dodging through chaos, and always staying a step ahead. Every element in Doom supported this. The design team even came up with a phrase for how the game should feel moment to moment. Bruce Lee on a skateboard with a shotgun. And that wasn't just about the speed. It was about the flow, the style and rhythm of the combat. The arena layout of encounters played a huge role in this. When the combat arena gives you the right amount of space to dodge, jump, and weave between enemies, it naturally boosts the feeling of speed and control. Doom's combat was often compared internally to something called combat chess. The idea was that every enemy is a puzzle, and the solution is not just which weapon you use on them, it's where you are, how you move, and what do you prioritize. In Doom, there is no front line. Attacks can come from anywhere, like in a multiplayer game. The player is in the center and the whole arena becomes the chessboard. To make that work, enemies needed to be very readable. Demons in Doom weren't about clever tactics. They were bold, simple and fast. Their roles were clear. You could describe each enemy in one simple sentence. Not because they were shallow, but because the player doesn't have time to analyze the enemies. By the time an enemy tries doing something smart, they are already dead. Enemy reactions were also carefully tuned to support the power fantasy. A shot didn't just do damage, it could stop a charging enemy, interrupt an attack, or stagger a demon mid-jump. Finishing animations were synced to the part of enemy you were looking at, so what you saw always matched what you hit. The finishing moves didn't just add a brutal flair, they added anticipation and surprise, creating a kind of chocolate box effect, where you are excited to see which animation you will get next. And when it came to ranged enemies, their job wasn't to pin the player down, it was to create space. The enemies in Doom miss on purpose if the player is moving fast enough. Not because the AI couldn't aim, it's because Doom wants you to feel like the Slayer. Like you are always outsmarting everything, even when the odds are against you. Everything is built around that confidence. The enemies, the arenas, the movement. In God of War, you plow through enemies. In Doom, you dance around them. And in both games, the goal is the same. Give the player control, confidence, and a chance to express themselves through combat. But there is another game that takes that idea of playful combat and pushes it to extreme. A game where every fight feels like a performance, and the player is the star of the show. I'm talking about Devil May Cry 5. Instead of starting with systems or mechanics, Devil May Cry's designers began their work with a feeling. They asked themselves, what do we want the player to feel moment to moment? And that question shapes everything in the game. The team at Capcom called it designing by reverse engineering emotions. Imagine the exact experience you want to have during a fight. Stylish, responsive, and exciting. Then ask yourself, what kind of mechanics would make that feeling possible? In Devil May Cry 5, success isn't defined by a simple win or loss. It's shaped by how stylishly and precisely you handle each encounter. The game is full of systems that let players feel their own improvement, not just in terms of results, but through subtle feedback in every moment. A great example of this is the max act mechanics. If you time it perfectly, you get a full charge on your sword. If you are close but not quite there, you still get a partial charge. And even if your timing is way off, the game still gives you a small reward. It's a layered system that rewards effort, precision, and persistence, not just perfection. This way, players can sense themselves getting better, even when they are just still learning the ropes. This is the part of the game that feels so fun to practice. Like many great action games, it works almost like learning tools, training players to master a system through subtle, satisfying feedback. You see it again in the stylish rank system. After each fight, the game grades your performance, with a system similar to how you get graded in school. It's not about passing or failing, it's about seeing your growth. And even more than that, it encourages players to try cooler combos, mix up their attacks, and make fights look as good as they feel. And what happens when things don't go your way? Devil May Cry 5 has an answer for that too. One that turns failure into yet another opportunity to engage with the game's systems. If the player goes down in battle, they are given the option to continue by spending red orbs, which they've been collecting throughout the game, or using a rarer but more powerful golden orb. What's interesting here is the way the red orb system gives players a choice. How much do you want to invest in getting back up? The more you spend, the more health you will return with. It's almost like placing a bet on yourself. I think I can finish this fight if I come back with this amount of health. And if you don't, it's not the game's fault. It's the bet that you took, and it's part of the deal you made. This turns revival into a small but meaningful moment of player expression. Even in failure, the game gives you a chance to play. Devil May Cry 5 isn't just fun to play. It makes you feel like you are performing. And whether you are button mashing or mastering every mechanic in the game, it always finds a way to reward you. That's what makes its combat feel playful. It meets you right where you are, then invites you to level up. So, what makes combat feel playful? Across these three very different games, the answer seems to lie in the same core ideas: giving players the space to express themselves, systems that reward creativity and growth, and mechanics that support, not punish, experimentation. Whether it's the strategic crowd control in God of War, the relentless motion of Doom, or the stylish performance of Devil May Cry, each one offers combat that just feels like you're playing. And that video is just the beginning. I'm planning to shoot more videos exploring how great games use design to shape emotions, learning, and expression. So if you are into breaking games apart and seeing what makes them tick, subscribe not to miss out on future videos. See you in the next one. Bye!